Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Evan sat on the edge of the couch, absent-mindedly changing the TV channels. He couldn't concentrate on a single program. His wife's word from yesterday echoed in his head. Jenna had been complaining about her best friend Laura's difficult family life for days now. It had become a ritual. Late at night, before she went to bed, Jenna's impenetrable face told her how much Laura was suffering and how she longed for freedom. You know, Jenna said yesterday, draining her glass of white wine, she had another fight with her husband. He doesn't understand her at all. He can't hear her. It's so hard for her. Evan, she said with genuine concern in her voice. Evan, who was already under the blanket, turned to his wife and tried to listen to the conversation. Look, maybe Laura should think about getting a divorce. Since things are so bad, he suggested, trying to make it sound calm. But Jenna immediately cringed, as if Evan had suggested something outrageous. No, you don't understand. She just needs to talk. She needs a little support. We're not going to tell her to break up the marriage right away, are we? Evan didn't say anything. He didn't really know all the details, but Jenna talked about Laura so often that he was beginning to feel as if his own wife cared more about this other man's marriage than he did about his own. The next day, Jenna picked up her phone, glanced at another message from her suffering friend, and immediately told her husband, I'm going to Laura's for a while. It seems she had a fight with her husband. She's not well. I don't want to leave her alone. Evan felt a growing irritation. At first, he sympathized with both Laura and Jenna, because friendship was important, and it was a noble thing to help a friend in a difficult moment. But a few weeks had passed, and the constant worry about Laura hadn't gone away. On the contrary, it spread through the house like a shadow, overshadowing everything else. Jenna arrived late, sometimes even smelling of alcohol. She'd say her friend was all messed up, that she needed to talk. That said, Evan couldn't remember a single day when Jenna had ever looked truly upset about all the helping she'd done. Rather, there was a sort of nervous excitement sparkling in her eyes. One evening, as Jenna was about to go out, Evan leisurely got up from his seat in the living room and stepped closer to her. Look, honey, don't you think you're getting too involved in this? It's her family. They have their own problems. We could support Laura, but why are you always rushing to her, leaving everything behind? Jenna shrugged, adjusting the fancy leather jacket she didn't normally wear in her daily life. What do you mean, getting involved too much? She's my best friend, Jenna answered with a hint of annoyance. If you had a close friend who was sick, wouldn't you go to them? It was ironclad logic, and Evan couldn't find anything to say against it. But a vague uneasiness had already settled in his soul, like a proverbial thorn. He forced himself to shrug it off, telling himself it was just jealousy or selfishness, because he loved spending evenings with Jenna. But the questions, like seeds, had already fallen into his consciousness and begun to sprout. A few more days passed. Jenna continued her rescue operations for Laura, and Evan was immersed in his own work. He was an architect-designer and had just signed a contract for a new project. The stress of new commitments was enough, and at times he was glad there was silence in the house and no one running around forcing him to be distracted. Each time evening came, however, he felt more and more alone. One Saturday, Evan expected that he and his wife would at least spend a quiet morning together, like the good old days. But around 9 in the morning, Jenna's cell phone rang, and 5 minutes later she was on her way to help Laura. She didn't return until lunchtime, disheveled, as if after a windy walk. When asked what had happened, Jenna replied, Nothing's wrong. It's just that Laura was worried about fighting with her husband again. I barely got her to calm down. Then Evan realized that the situation was clearly out of the norm. But so far, he saw it only as his wife's over-involvement in someone else's relationship, not something more. The slight tension in the air was building, but so slowly that it could be mistaken for normal family tensions. The situation became even stranger when talk of poor Laura literally filled the entire space of his and Jenna's house. As if on cue, every other sentence his wife uttered began with a mention of Laura. At breakfast, at dinner, at bedtime, even when they were on a walk in the park, poor Laura seemed to stick in every conversation. You know, Laura can't sleep at all lately. I'm thinking about getting her some melatonin pills, Jenna said, pulling away from her coffee. Why would I do that? Evan asked thoughtfully, flipping through the news on his phone. She told me that her husband was always giving her a hard time at night. Can you believe it? Jenna sounded indignant. Evan had no doubt that all was not well at Laura's house. But something about the story still felt excessive. He'd suggested to his wife a couple times, "Why don't I talk to Laura's husband? Like a man?" Each time he heard a sharp rebuke, No, stay out of it. It's none of your business. It's too complicated." Or something like, "Laura doesn't want anyone else to know about this. Especially you." When Laura texted Jenna, his wife sometimes frowned and left the room to answer, as if embarrassed to talk in front of her husband. Sometimes, on the contrary, her face lit up with a smile. But it was all happening somehow, secretly and glimpsed. Evan began to get the feeling that Jenna wasn't just worried about Laura, she was living in those conversations. And less time for him. One evening, when Jenna was anxiously typing again, Evan dared to ask her a direct question. "Look, why don't I come with you to support Laura for once? Maybe I could give you some advice." He was about to add, "I'm a good listener too," but before he could finish, Jenna reacted instantly. No. She exhaled sharply, not taking her eyes off the phone screen. "This is private conversations. You wouldn't understand." She sounded clearly annoyed, and Evan realized it was useless to insist. He held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Okay, whatever you say." But inwardly, he felt uncomfortable with his wife's insistence on keeping him away from these supposedly innocent women's gatherings. He began to remember small details, how she had changed her clothes more than once before going to Laura's, and even put on lipstick and eye makeup, which she had only done on special occasions before. How she abruptly stopped talking about her emotions, even though they used to have a very warm, trusting relationship. How lately, when he'd come home, Jenna had been silent a lot, and when he'd asked her questions, she'd answered something inaudible. A slight uneasiness grew into a lump of doubt. Evan began to wonder, is she really with Laura all the time? Maybe her friend is really having a hard time, but then why the need to hide her phone from me? So far, he couldn't come up with a logical answer, and he insinuated that he was just imagining problems where there weren't any. But the seed of disbelief had taken hold, and the observation he'd once made was not going away. The more Jenna began to disappear in the evenings. Sometimes she would say, "We should have coffee and discuss the latest news." Other times, "She's really depressed. Let's go to the spa together. She needs to relax." And one time she said, "I just have to be there for her. It's Laura's wedding anniversary, and she feels like crap." And so on. The list of excuses was endless, and Evan, looking at it all, couldn't understand where his wife was getting such a relentless energy to support a friend who, by the looks of it, had been in a deep crisis for a long time. But the most annoying thing about it was that every time she went to Laura's house, Jenna didn't choose outfits to comfort her sobbing friend. She wore things that would be more appropriate for a party than for a quiet conversation in the kitchen. A beautiful dress with a deep neckline, a short skirt, high heels, fancy jewelry, it all looked strange for someone who was going to morally support a deeply unhappy woman. In addition, after these trips, she often showed up at home visibly agitated. Sometimes she smelled like an expensive cocktail, or even the faint scent of tobacco, even though Jenna never smoked. When Evan tried to ask, "Listen, what's that smoke smell in your hair?" she waved it away embarrassedly. "I guess someone was smoking nearby at the bar where we were sitting. Yeah, we went in for a drink because Laura needed to calm down." Evan felt a growing uneasiness. It was like he was haunted by the constant feeling that something was going on behind his back that he shouldn't know about. Sometimes he thought his wife was just getting a taste for the forbidden, perhaps some new company not suitable for a family man. But why hide it? One evening, when Jenna had already returned home, all lightheaded, as if after a fun time, Evan tried to figure out what was wrong. He sat down next to her on the couch, put his arm around her shoulders, and asked, "You and I have been seeing so little of each other lately. Is everything okay? Maybe I should accompany you more often to help in some way." He really wanted to show that he was ready to support both her and her friend. But Jenna immediately slipped out of his embrace, stood up, and walked to the kitchen, pretending to look for something to eat in the fridge. We're fine. I want Laura to not feel abandoned. It's okay, really. The words sounded too rushed to be convincing. But Evan kept quiet. He didn't want to ruin the rest of the evening with a scandal. Even then, however, he realized that Laura might just be a cover for something else. After all, he'd never even called Laura in person, never offered to come over to their house. And Jenna had clearly avoided such offers. Soon his doubts were confirmed. Late one night, when Evan was already asleep, Jenna's cell phone suddenly lit up, announcing a message. She'd been sleeping so soundly that she hadn't noticed the vibration. Evan glanced curiously at the screen. A name popped up there, Laura. The message was short. You were great yesterday. Can't wait for next time. Evan's heart instantly snapped. His first thought was, a typo? Maybe Laura got the wrong addressee. Evan seemed to hear his heart pounding frantically in his chest, speeding up the blood. It can't be. He sat in a daze for several minutes, restraining himself from waking his wife and starting the interrogation. The doubts that had been smoldering for the past weeks instantly flared into a blaze of rage and fear. Several times he'd rushed to wake Jenna to find out on the spot, but something inside told him, not now. Take it easy. We need to figure out how things really are first. The night turned out to be a sleepless one. Evan clutched the phone like prey and waited for morning, when he could finally figure out what was going on. Jenna woke up the next morning and didn't notice her husband's restlessness. She stretched habitually, smiled at Evan, though he was sitting silent, extremely tense. Then she got up, stepped into the shower, and closed the door behind her. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, feeling his legs jacking up from nervous tension. He felt an almost physical pain, imagining what could be behind that message. When the sound of water was heard, he stood up and, acting determined, walked over to the table where Jenna's phone lay. He knew he was probably doing the wrong thing by violating his wife's privacy, but after what he'd seen the night before, he had no moral barriers left. He opened her phone and quickly found a chat room with that very name, Laura, and then his heart pounded even harder. The messages he read left no doubt. This was not a correspondence with Laura and not a woman's chat at all. There was no profile picture, he realized, and the contact was listed as Laura, but the text, it was drenched in passion and hints of something clearly beyond friendly conversation. Excerpts from the messages. Laura, are you free tonight? He won't get suspicious. Jenna, no, it's under control. He's so naive. Laura, then it's just like yesterday, only now in a different place. In between the messages were phrases filled with emoticons and innuendo, but written a couple days before, I've been thinking about you all night, yesterday was so great, and so on. No hint of the real Laura. Evan took a short breath, ran his hand through his hair, and felt everything inside tighten into a tight knot. So she lied to me. Lied about her friend, about her misfortune. This whole story is a lie. Evan's mind raced. But then who is this man who hides under the name Laura? And why does he mention he won't suspect? The questions grew more and more. He remembered the night message. You were great last night. Now the puzzle was coming together. Laura was a man, a lover. Jenna was dating him, using Laura as a cover. The whole unhappy friend thing turned out to be just a fabrication, or worse, a setup the wife was using to cover up her own infidelity. Shock was replaced by a wave of anger, mixed with a sense of betrayal. Evan's first impulse was to burst into the bathroom and have a showdown, right here and now. But what would that accomplish? We need to keep calm, Evan implored himself, taking a step back. He felt he still loved Jenna, and he didn't want to destroy the marriage without complete clarity. Maybe there was some other angle to all of this? But the words of the correspondence sounded peremptory. He's so naive was particularly jarring. That was him, Evan. How could she? He barely had time to put the phone back down before the water turned off in the bathroom. Evan quickly sat down on the bed and pretended to read the news on his phone. Jenna, wrapped in a towel, came out looking calm, as if nothing much was going on in the world. Good morning. How are you? She asked lazily. I'm fine, Evan answered dryly, trying to look immersed in the screen. How are you? Fine. She nodded and started wiping her hair. Every move she made seemed like a mockery to Evan. He stared at her, realizing that behind the casualness was the person who'd been lying to his face for the past few weeks. But instead of directly challenging her to a frank conversation, he decided to proceed differently. He wanted to gather more evidence before jumping to conclusions or making life-changing decisions. Evan spent the entire day in heavy brooding. His emotions raged inside, but on the outside he wore a mask of indifference. Jenna didn't seem to suspect a thing, but now Evan was determined to find out the truth. Over the next few days, Evan was emphatically calm. He showed no signs of jealousy or resentment. He didn't talk about the messages he'd seen, but everything was burning inside him. He tried to be affectionate with Jenna, watching for the slightest change in her reaction. And indeed, sometimes he thought she looked at him with a slight suspicion, maybe sensing that something was wrong. But apparently her sense of security, fueled by her confidence in his cunning, outweighed it. One night, just before bedtime, Evan told her specifically, "You know, I have an urgent business trip this weekend. I have to go out of town to a customer's house. I'm leaving tomorrow afternoon and won't be back until Monday." Jenna's eyes gleamed slightly and her face tensed for a split second. "Really?" Well, she pretended that the news didn't make her feel any better. "It's a shame we won't be able to spend the weekend together, but work is work." They stared at each other for a moment. Evan could feel his heart beating somewhere in his throat. He knew this business trip was a green light for her to spend time with her lover. He didn't need extra confirmation. Her eyes said it all by themselves. But he promised himself, "Now I'll know the truth for sure." The next day, carefully packing his suitcase, he said goodbye to his wife. "Don't get bored here without me," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "Go out with Laura, maybe?" Jenna recoiled, as if the name was something unpleasant, and then tried to smile. "Yes, maybe I will. She's having a hard time," she said, looking away. Evan suppressed a bitter chuckle. "Of course, with Laura," he thought. Then he left the house, got in his car, and drove just a few streets away. There he stopped and waited for the time, watching the house from a distance. Half an hour later, Jenna showed up out of the door in a short dress with a nice hairdo and high heels. She got in her car and drove toward the center of town. Evan started the engine and followed, trying to keep his distance so he wouldn't be noticed. Jenna parked in front of some apartment building. Evan stopped a little farther away, watching as she walked toward the entryway. "This must be where that Laura lives," Evan thought, feeling the anger boiling up inside. He wanted to get out and follow her, but something inside told him, "Check out the real Laura first. Make sure you're not definitively wrong." He waited a while longer and then headed toward his friend's house, the address he remembered from his wife's past mentions. Once there, he rang the doorbell. Laura opened the door almost immediately. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, and her eyes were wide with surprise. "Evan, hi, isn't Jenna with you?" Laura asked. Evan's insides shivered, but he tried to keep his tone calm. "Hi, Laura. The thing is, Jenna said she was coming to see you. We were going to drive up together, but I had an emergency, and I thought maybe she was already here." "No, Jenna hasn't," Laura frowned. "I haven't seen her in like 3 weeks, I think. I'm doing fine now, and I haven't even called her." "That's weird." That answer was a lightning jab to the heart. 3 weeks? Evan repeated mentally. So all that time, she hasn't been in contact with Laura at all? He felt the crystal clear picture of betrayal fall into place. Jenna was just covering for her poor friend, so she could sneak out to see someone else. Laura, noticing the confusion on Evan's face, asked, "Is something wrong? You look like your whole world is falling apart right now." Evan didn't know what to answer. He didn't want to drag Laura into this scandal. She was already an accidental victim of someone else's lies. So he found the strength to smile and said, No, I'm sorry to bother you. It was just a misunderstanding. I'll see you later, Laura." As he turned around, he heard his friend's anxious voice behind him. "If you need anything, you can call me anytime. I think there's something wrong with you and Jenna." Evan nodded and walked quickly to the car. Everything fell into place now. There was no unhappy Laura with grandiose problems. There was no endless arguments with her husband that Jenna was so eager to work out. It had turned out to be a ridiculous and cruel fiction to escape to her lover. He felt the anger surge like a sea tide threatening to swamp the entire shore. He wanted to run to the entryway where he'd seen his wife, to barge in, to make a scandal, but again he stopped himself. Enough emotion. We have to see this through to the end, to know everything for sure, and then put a stop to it. A few days later, Evan's plan finally came together. He realized that just finding out about the cheating was half the battle. He had to get Jenna to come clean so that she couldn't get away with it, so that she would admit to it. Otherwise, it would just end up being another excuse, and deep down, he still hoped it was some kind of nightmarish misunderstanding. He'd noticed that Jenna was getting impatient for him to leave on his second business trip. But Evan wasn't talking about new departures now, and Jenna was nervous, as if she couldn't seem to find time for secret meetings. Finally, he seized the moment. He referred to an urgent call to a customer late at night. "I have to go," he said at the door, taking his jacket and keys. "I won't be back soon, so don't wait up." "Okay," Jenna replied, and Evan caught the look of relief on her face. As soon as he got out, he got back in his car and drove to the part of town where he'd once seen her car in the driveway. This time he didn't wait outside the house, but caught her on the way out and drove slowly after her. He noticed that she'd gone straight downtown, parked her car at a bar in a busy neighborhood with a lot of entertainment venues. Evan got out of the car, tried to avoid her eyes, and entered the same bar from the back entrance. He sat at a booth in the far corner, where the light was dim and he could sit without attracting attention. Inside, the music was blaring, people laughing and shouting. It was easy to go unnoticed in such half-drunken noise. And then he saw her. Jenna was sitting at a table in the back of the room, next to a man. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Laura was sitting next to her. But the real Laura, he knew, had nothing to do with any of this. But the face of the woman at the table was indeed that of the friend he had seen at the door a few days ago. Evan was startled. Did Laura really know about their meetings after all? Was she really part of the story too? He started to look around and noticed another man sitting at the same table. 4. Jenna, Laura, and 2 strangers. They were in pairs, Jenna close to a tall, dark-haired guy and Laura to a slightly shorter blonde guy. Evan couldn't believe his eyes. It looked like his wife and her best friend were acting like cronies having fun with 2 gentlemen. From time to time they laughed, looked at each other, and one of the men put his arm around the other. Evan's head was spinning. So the real Laura had been playing a double game with Jenna all this time? But then why was she lying to him at the door? Or was this some kind of second Laura, and the real friend didn't realize? He was bursting with questions when suddenly a waiter, a young guy with a friendly smile, appeared behind counter. "Can I get you anything, sir?" he asked. Evan quietly ordered a glass of water. He wanted to cool his throat and brain a little. But the waiter looked at him and squinted, as if trying to find out. "Excuse me, you're the Mr. Evan, aren't you?" he said, tilting his head to the side. Evan's heart twitched. "I'm sorry, we haven't met," he said cautiously. The guy fidgeted. "Oh, I'm sorry, I must have gotten you mixed up. It's just that your wife, well, that lady over there with the long dark hair, she often comes in with a guy named Evan. I thought that was you. They always order the same cocktails. Sorry again." With those words, the waiter quickly departed, and Evan felt a hot wave pass through his body. She brought her lover here and called him by my name? Ran through his mind. Or is this lover introducing himself as Evan? It sounded like a nightmare or a mocking joke. He took a deep breath, set the glass on the counter, and slowly moved toward the table where his wife was sitting. His heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone in the bar could hear it. As he approached, he noticed Jenna turn her head slightly, a look of panic on her face when she saw him. Laura opened her eyes in amazement, and the men just sat there, staring at the strange visitor incomprehensibly. The tension reached a climax. Evan stopped right in front of their table. Jenna instantly turned pale when she saw him, as if she suddenly realized that the illusion she had been creating had collapsed. Laura, who was sitting next to him, also looked at Evan with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "Hey, who the hell is that?" A tall man, the one sitting next to Jenna, spoke up. He didn't seem to know Evan by sight. "This is my friend," Jenna mumbled, clearly making up words as she went along. Evan grinned coldly. "Your friend? Interesting. I thought I was your husband." Both men's jaws dropped open at that phrase. They looked at each other, not knowing which one of them was in the center of the scandal. Laura, who was sitting with the other guy, suddenly looked away, as if she were unbearably embarrassed. "Husband," the one next to Laura interjected. "Laura, what's going on?" And then Evan turned to his wife and said with all the pain that had accumulated, "Poor Laura, huh? The friend you saved from your family's problems? The friend you disappeared nights for?" Jenna shrank back as if she wanted to vaporize. She threw helpless glances back and forth at Laura and both men, trying to find a way out. Laura, pale and trembling, suddenly exclaimed, "You know what, Jenna? I'm tired of covering for your lies. You promised me it would be secret, that I wouldn't be involved." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't want this. I just wanted to get away." Evan froze. They were in cahoots, after all. Jenna tried to pull herself together and gritted her teeth. "Laura, shut up, please," but her voice trembled, revealing her fear. "No, I won't shut up." Laura raised her voice. "You said your husband was always at work, that he wouldn't find out. You said things had cooled off between you and him a long time ago. And I only agreed to it because I was tired of the family routine. But God knows I didn't want to cheat, didn't want to hurt anyone." Both men listened to this in utter bewilderment. The tall, dark-haired guy, apparently Jenna's lover, looked at her sullenly, not knowing where to go. The one with Laura moved away slowly, as if about to get up and leave. "So," Evan said, "your whole story about your friend's unhappy marriage, it was just a cover for your secret meeting with." He nodded at the dark-haired guy. "Was Laura here for a reason, too?" Jenna was breathing hard, squirming in her chair. She was probably trying to think of an excuse, but the whole scene seemed so obvious that words couldn't save the day. Finally, she jumped up, took a step toward Evan, and whispered, "Let me explain. Let's go talk in private." But Evan's eyes were already filled with icy determination. "Alone? Are you sure I want to hear your excuses? 5 minutes ago, the waiter mistook me for the guy named Evan you come here with. Was it your twisted sense of humor to call him by my name?" Jenna flinched as if she'd been punched in the face. She just sobbed quietly. "Evan, listen. Things aren't what they seem." But it was too late. The feelings of betrayal, bitterness, and resentment bubbled up in him so strongly that he couldn't bear her presence anymore. In his head flashed images of all the past trips to his friend, all those deceptions, phone correspondence, where he, her husband, appeared as naive. He wanted to scream, wanted to smash everything around him, but he restrained himself. His gaze stopped on Laura, who looked at him pitifully, as if she wanted to apologize but couldn't find the words. Then he looked at Jenna again. "You don't have to explain anything to me. You said it all in your messages." After a few seconds, Evan turned around abruptly and staggered toward the exit of the bar. He could hear behind him Jenna yelling something and Laura crying. He heard one of the men trying to calm her down, saying, "Let's get out of here." But Evan didn't care about them. The only thought pulsing in his head was, how could she? When he stepped outside, the cool air hit him. The whole world seemed to shrink at the humming sound of blood pounding in his temples. He had never felt so cheated and alone. He got into the car, sat with his eyes closed for several minutes, shuddering with flushes of anger and despair. But finally, he turned on the ignition and drove home. At home, he began frantically packing, taking shirts and pants out of the closet, throwing them into a suitcase. His head worked almost mechanically. No emotions. "I'm too angry to talk to her right now. I just can't stay here." Before he could finish, Jenna appeared in the doorway. Her face was deeply frightened. Tears smeared her mascara. Her dress was askew, and she looked like she'd lost one of her heels on the way in. "Evan, please listen to me," she said pleadingly. I know what I did was wrong, but it was a mistake. I didn't mean to ruin our marriage." Evan took a deep breath. He was exhausted, furious, depressed. Barely able to keep his voice down, he uttered, "A mistake? You know, cheating might still be forgivable if there's remorse. But what you did, you kept me for an idiot. You lied for weeks. You tricked me. You used your friend as a cover. You let your lover use my name at the bar. That's not a mistake. That's a calculated betrayal, Jenna." His wife flinched as if each rebuke was a new blow. She sank helplessly to her knees, covering her face with her hands. Please give me a chance to make things right. I don't know what was wrong with me. I thought we didn't have the same passion, that you were too busy working. I happened to meet? No, never mind. I was drawn to it, and I couldn't stop. Laura wanted something new too, and Evan couldn't believe she was trying to talk about some boring routine as an excuse. It was like she'd just been blown away by the wind. It all sounded ridiculous and pathetic. He pulled out his suitcase and closed its zipper, not letting Jenna touch himself. I'm leaving. I don't know what's going to happen next, but right now, I need to be alone. And I suggest you think about what you wanted to accomplish with this. She grabbed him by the edge of his jacket, tears streaming down her cheeks. Evan, no, don't leave me. We've been together for so many years. I know I've ruined everything, but you love me, don't you? At that moment, he felt a cruel emptiness inside him. He loved her, of course, but he could no longer be around her after what he had seen and read. Infidelity could be experienced in many ways, but a false double life was much harder to forgive. You know, Evan pulled his hand out her fingers. I might forgive the infidelity itself, but I'll never forgive the way you've played me for a fool, mocking me behind my back, thinking I'm a naive fool. I'm not your toy, Jenna. He turned and walked out the door, leaving her on her knees in the hallway, sobbing and broken. The tears gave him no sympathy. The pain of his own betrayal was too intense. When the door slammed shut behind him, he felt like something big and important in his life had just crumbled. But along with it, all illusions had crumbled. Already sitting in the car, he couldn't move for a few minutes. He stared at one point on the steering wheel, realizing that now their fate hung in the air. And yet he knew he had made the right choice in leaving. He didn't know if he'd ever come back, if he'd ever want to hear any excuses, if he'd ever get through this and start over. But he knew one thing for sure. The life he thought he was happy with was just an illusion, collapsed overnight. His last sentence, spoken to his wife's face, rang in his head like a final chord. I'd forgive cheating, but not that you held me for an idiot. Evan slammed the door, started the car, and drove out of the yard without looking back. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.